in and running. If you're enjoying yourself so much that you want to tell people about it, you can tweet us. We are at the OGTC, or if you're an Instagram user, hashtag the OGTC. So first of all, thanks all of you for coming and listening. And I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who's Will Mitchell, and our TechX director, David. So first of all, Will, come on down.
Mic's on?
Yep, you're good to go. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Love to. My name's Will Mitchell. I'm design director at a company called 4C Design. We're based in Glasgow, and we do a lot of design engineering, product design, that kind of stuff, early stage prototyping and stuff like that, scoping out, very innovative, lots of industry experience, and I'll obviously go into that in a bit more detail.
You've just beaten my next question, which was what are you going to talk to us about today?
Well, the subject I want to cover is prototyping tech, is really just prototyping, and I think the importance of it, my experience of it, and hopefully a few tips.
Okay, and one last question for David. Can you tell us why this is of interest to us here at the OGTC and hopefully for the wider community too?
So yeah, so I run the TechX program, which is the Technology Accelerator program. We've got our first 10 startups joining us on the 4th of June for a 4-month intense program. Part of that is about getting them technology, commercial, and investor ready during that period of time. So part of that is hugely important, is having partners on board like Will with 4C and others that can really help provide expertise, guidance, support, and their services to really help accelerate the development of the product, to make sure they're learning as early as possible so they can develop the best product they possibly can, to get that to market as quick as they can and make sure that they can sell it as quick as they can. So we're really delighted to have 4C on board as one of our key partners in TechX, and delighted Will could join us here today. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, David. And on that note, Will, it's over to you. Your 20-minute start now.
Goodness, right. Thanks for that. I think a big congratulations are in order, I think, for the companies that did make it through the TechX program. I think the support the OGTC are going to put in place is fantastic, and is kind of one of the reasons why I had this big long think about what I was going to talk about, and I thought starting out was a good subject. Certainly, given 20 odd years ago when we started out, or I started out in my career, things were very different. There was very little support for innovation. A lot of people didn't know what it was. A lot of people were walking out, blinded by the lights, not really sure what to do. And I think sort of taking a big step back and actually looking at my career, and in fact some of the influences behind the work I've done, I thought I would just tell you a little story. Going back sort of 20 odd years, this is definitely before 4C, my father and I had a consultancy. It was product design engineering. We had quite a big client, and we were looking at a sort of compact camera housing, and bearing in mind 20 years ago context, compact was still pretty big. And one of the things that we were in a big meeting, and we had, say, 10 in the room. We had technical experts, we had the company owner, we had marketing, we had sales, my father and I, and we had drawings, illustrations, renders, everything laid out on the table, and we were talking through this design, trying to freeze the design, basically. The meeting had gone on for about an hour, and somebody in the room who hadn't said much suddenly said, "This is all well and good. Having everything sitting here, I kind of understand, but what does it look like?" And this moment, I thought, I'm glad I made the decision I did the night before. I had a bit of a premonition. And towards the end of my working day, I thought, we're going into this big meeting. We've got drawings, we've got renders, we've got everything we need. I thought, I wonder if I should just hack a quick model together. So I went to the workshop, made a little foam model, stuck a lens on it to this effect. Bearing in mind, 20 years ago, this is compact, so don't judge. And I put this together, and I put it in my bag. And in the meeting, when this happened, and somebody said, what does it look like? I picked this out the bag, and I put it in the middle of the table. And immediately, everybody drew to it. One person picked it up, looked at it, said that the size is great, the lens looks great, everything. We had a transition from quite an anxious meeting to really quite a relaxed meeting where everybody realized, right, I think we're on it. We've got good dimensions. It looks the part, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, somebody who was in their 20s, young, you know, I was young at that point, and I thought to myself, I'm out of my comfort zone in this, you know, caliber of meeting, and to do this really just leveled everything. And at that point, I kind of thought to myself, there's real power in prototyping, even at this level. And as crude as this was, and it didn't do anything, it wasn't of the right materials, it wasn't really of the right finish, but it just leveled everything. And that kind of sort of helped direct the way that we, as 4C, and certainly the way that I've evolved as a designer. The communication is so critical when you get to that sort of level, when meetings are getting quite anxious and there's decisions to be made, that just, it doesn't really matter what level you're at, just doing something like that is good. So I'm going to click to my first slide, and only slide, because this is quite a bold move, not having slides. But to give the whole thing context, when you are in a situation like that and you've got a project running, and I've got a timeline along the bottom which is actually doesn't have any scale to it, purely because this can apply to any project. The point being that the timescale can be 6 months, the timescale can be 5 years, depending on what you're doing. And the way that we try and work a project is that we like to make as many decisions, mistakes, failures, we've all heard that kind of stuff at this point in the process. And I know a lot of you have already been here and have, you know, probably experienced this. Some of you may never have been on a sort of journey of doing a product like this or product development, but it really is critical at this point to you know, kind of pre-dotted line to make all those changes and financial decisions. Because what we've got is two lines. We've got cost of change and we've got ease of change. And this scale could be sort of, you know, low to high. Very, very easy to change things at this stage. You know, going back to my foam model in the meeting, if I'd brought that in and it had been a bit big, somebody in the room would have said, you know, it's a bit big. Can we just maybe cut? I could probably have done it there and then, maybe snapped it off it. But if we had gone that step further, that meeting had all shaken hands and walked away, and we had committed to making 300 of these things, and I'd put it in the middle of the room and somebody said, that's a bit big. What happens then is you're moving much, much further along this line. You're committed to your suppliers, you're doing all that kind of stuff. You want to, you know, you really don't want to find yourself in that situation, because then you're making 300 more. So it's really just about getting through this part with as many, you know, making as many changes and iterations as you can. And this is kind of what we do. We're very hands-on. We've got a big workshop. We like to build to think, if you like, is the way we describe it. As these lines converge, you get to a point where there's maybe, this is a kind of key decision point. This is where we would ideally freeze the design so that by the time you've committed to suppliers and, you know, you've committed your design, you know, you're in a much more secure place. So we've effectively de-risked the whole process. And that's just kind of the logic. And it's very simplistic. It does apply to any industry, which is why we can basically play in any industry. And actually the advantage of playing in any industry means that you have that knowledge going in, that's all fresh eyes, and you can cross-fertilize with all the ideas. So this is a very strong thing. So it also, I think I want to make the point that it doesn't really matter how crude that level of prototyping is, as long as it proves something or ticks something off the list, then you know that you're making progress. So I can't really remember what happened to that product in the end. You know, it was one of those things. It was a small packet of work. We handed over, we did the job, and off we went to the next one. But one project that we did work on, which I thought was probably worth sharing with you, because we did a similar, very, very similar exercise, and I do know what happened to that, which is good, was a product that we built. Now, what happened here was we had an individual, he was in the agricultural industry, tagging mainly, you know, plastic tags for sheep and cattle. And he'd been in that industry for a long time, so he really knew the market. And there was a piece of legislation that came through which was upping the security around animal tracing, so, you know, especially in the sheep market. So wool and meat, you needed to be able to trace way back through the history of the animal and stuff. And the legislation coming in was that sheep had to be tagged with an identification number in one ear and an electronic tag in the other. And the consequences of that for a lot of farmers were, well, basically that's double the work, double the expense. And it was really a negative move in many eyes. But for this chap, he saw it as an opportunity. He saw it as an opportunity because it's legislation, it's going to happen, you have to deal with it. He also thought, if we could develop a new tag gun that supplied tags quickly, so you weren't really increasing the time around it, then we'd possibly be able to sell this to the market and actually have it accepted. Also, the way he was thinking was, if you've got an animal which has got a dumb tag in one ear and an electronic tag in the other, you could actually mold 20 tags in one go, having dumb, electric, all that kind of stuff. So you could actually have them all laid out for you. And we quite liked this idea, and we worked with the chap. And at the beginning, we were talking through the kind of ergonomics, the mechanics around this thing. We didn't want it to be electric. We didn't want it to be powered. We just wanted it to be a pure mechanical thing. So we had a day session with him. And one of the guys went away downstairs into our workshop, and a couple of hours later, he came back with this. And we were all sitting around the table looking at it, and he said, you know, I just needed to get it out my head, he said. And what this illustrated was simply the geometry that we had to play with. This has to fit in somebody's hand. So that was the first thing everybody did. Make sure it fits in the hand. It was a bit wide here, so we were able to, you know, tick that off, say we need to reduce that. We also, through the insight of the client, we knew that in the tagging process, when you put a tag through an ear, a sheep wants to do that, as you imagine. Just, you know, get a one out here. So what we had to do was make an articulated hammer here that would snap away instantly it had happened, so that the animal could run off. And what we did was we reckoned that we could drive the hammer down, and then we'd articulate a joint here which would snap it back if it was all spring-loaded. So you've got articulation, you've got the mechanics of it, you've got the ergonomics, you've got all of these things in one 2-hour model. Again, very early stage product. So after we'd established this, we were then able to work out where the tags would come in, how it would work with the animal. And this was a real step forward. So I had this sitting on my desk for a while we developed the CAD. As you move forward through the prototyping process, you can start to employ slightly more sort of committed processes like 3D printing, machining, various other bits that went on here. Now, there were clearly a few iterations between the model that I had first and this one, but the way that we developed this product was one step at a time. It's a complex product. There's quite a lot of demands on it. 20 tags have to be fed through here. We need to present at an angle, but we need to mold them flat. All sorts of things need to be considered. Automatically pick up the next one every time you tag. So you'd have your dumb tag, electronic tag, dumb tag, electronic tag, click, 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 click. So this was tested in the field. We reckoned there was a few failures around it. We needed to move trigger points, we needed to move pivot points, we needed to add bumps and features and stuff like that. But this was all able to happen without major commitment to tooling, to any kind of suppliers. We were really still pretty independent with this. So we were working on this iteratively and trying to get some form behind it. And then ultimately what happens is the thing just gets simpler and simpler. And by the time you've got to this stage, you're starting to look at the injection molding, you're starting to look at optimizing plastics. One thing that we worked out with the previous model was we needed a shroud. And the reason we needed the shroud was all these tags have got little spikes. And when you put them near a sheep, they get tangled up. It's like a magnet. They just get drawn in. Sheep runs off down the field with it. Not ideal. So with the shroud, you get all of that protection. And also with the clarity, you can see how many tags you've got left and all that kind of stuff. We had an idea that you would have a pouch of them and you could just slide in another set once you were done, so that it was continuous movement, continuous operation. All the while, the client is not just thinking about the UK market, thousands of sheep, per farm and all that kind of stuff. He's thinking about the Australian and the New Zealand markets, which was the next logical step for the legislation. Hundreds of thousands of sheep. Some farms, just go on to the horizon. And this is the sort of thing that they absolutely loved. So it's important, I guess, for us to also know what point we step off this kind of product development. So we eventually got to a point where we designed this thing and we built several prototypes. We had lots of tests going on, and then we had conversations with manufacturers. And the manufacturers were then happy to take that product on, and the client was then in liaison with the manufacturers. So we reached this kind of cross point where the design was signed off and they moved on. He was quite an impatient guy, but for good reason. He wanted to get this to market. One thing that really resonated with me in the conversations I had with him was that he knew there was a point where he would have to make the leap of faith and put this out there, even if it had slight issues and it wasn't quite ready. And it kind of got me thinking that, that design is never actually done, but good business knows when it's done enough. And this is the point. He was able to get this out to the market, keep in touch with all the people that bought the product, and get some form of feedback from them and make all those incremental improvements. Bearing in mind, a product like this isn't really centered around the actual gun. It's centered around the tags. That's the business model. So you want to get this thing out there. You want to get people relying on your tags, and you want to get people in. So for me, this was a really nice, succinct model that and as a project was relatively quick, because you start to get into, the scale of oil and gas and all these kind of stuff. The projects are big and they take a long time, but this was quite succinct. So as it happens, we've got another client based in the agricultural market and in sheep, and they, my colleagues, two of my colleagues were over in Australia, and they were in this big, like an agricultural B&Q type thing where it's all just agricultural products. You wouldn't believe it goes on forever. And they were in this shop, and the chap who was the head of sales was just walking around showing them all the stuff that was going on. And he said, we have a policy here where we try and gauge the scale of the farmer in terms of what kind of infrastructure they've got, how serious they are, so we can get a feel for what products are good for them. He said, we put some products on display, but we don't put prices against them because we want to get that conversation going. And he said, come over here. And he took the two guys to the desk. He said, but this one, and he pulled this thing out from underneath the counter. He said, this is the Rolls Royce of the tagging world. And it was our product. And it was just such a lovely sort of, to have, it's almost like seeing a familiar friend who's now just made a real success of themselves. It's just great to see that sort of kind of success come from a product. And I firmly believe that because we spent the time at the early stages and we really hammered through all the design iterations, and yes, there were tweaks as we went through, but nothing particularly major. That's how you get that quality of product right through to the end. And it's like that sort of process that we employ for every single product. As much as we can, we're hands-on, we're in the workshop, and I absolutely implore that that's the sort of thing, anybody who's starting out in business and starting out with products, it's a case of iterate as quickly as you can at the beginning and try and get as much engagement around that product as possible. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I've ended up being in the position I'm in, which is, this sort of things that we're doing for companies is just, it's innovative. It's at the early stages. It's like helping out with the fun stuff and making sure that you're getting it right in order for you then to be able to take that product further on into the marketplace. So I believe I'm a little ahead of time, but I'm sure that's no bad thing.
10 out of 10. Sure, thanks, please.
Thank you.
We're about to go into the Q&A, and I can see our enthusiastic CEO at the back there.
Hello, that was really interesting, so thanks.
Okay, thanks.
But you even alluded to it, and it's one of the challenges, I think, for David and for the whole team. What you had there was a relatively small, compact, transportable, movable product. We'll have some of those, but we'll have a lot of larger products. And this concept of fail fast, fail early, I think is really relevant. How do you think we can try and instill that and that vision in people do we do it at a smaller scale, or do we have to do it at like the sort of 2/3 scalability for people to get the feel for the product? I'm kind of curious as to how do you think we can make this work in the accelerator program that we're going to run?
It's a good question. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've done is the scales are all over the place. I mean, we did some work with you might be familiar with them, Survitech. They do a lot of safety equipment and stuff like that. And the stuff that they do is big. I mean, they do ranges of smaller stuff. But what we were challenged with, was to do with their safety products, and some of them were pretty big, but we were isolating components of that and sort of doing small tests on various, isolated technologies. And then you can build a bigger picture up. At some point, you've got to bite the bullet and go big. But I would say that, there are certain things that you can do to break everything down into bite-sized chunks. And if it is scaling stuff or it's isolating technologies and doing smaller tests and stuff like that, then there are lots and lots of ways of cutting it up. As I say, at some point you do need to go to scale, but if it's even just to get a context, we were doing a thing which was an offshore wave energy product, and they were actually talking about servicing the product. And you were approaching by boat and coming off and stepping onto the thing. So we needed to handle positions, secure points, all that kind of stuff. And we just mocked up a section of it in cardboard on the office, and then sort of put a chair at the right sort of height and just sort of tried to step, obviously not stepping on it, but stepping near it and thinking what logically is that point. So very quickly, at full scale in cardboard. It's kind of child's play in a way, but it's really, really valuable. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but it is. It's yes. Yeah. It can be overwhelming. The full scale can be overwhelming. So try and breaking it up is better.
Okay, this gentleman here. Just wait for the mic so we can make sure we pick it up.
Hello, thank you for your time, and your exposition is brilliant. What kind of size in the modeling are you capable of doing?
So we've got a pretty big workshop. I mean, I would say our workshop's almost about sort of 2/3 the size of this room. So we've got a big space. And I mean, do you mean fundamentally physical products that we make, or just in general
Just imagine the volume of the prototype you are building. Because, it depends on your 3D printing capabilities.
Yes.
Or things
well,
like that.
I mean, the thing with you've got 3D printing's been absolutely fantastic. The development over the last 20 years is incredible, and the scale of stuff that you can actually get printed is great. But in the early stages, where you're not necessarily committing immediately to CAD, you're actually physically building things. I mean, we build lots of mock-ups in wood, in foam, in cardboard, and as you sort of get through the process of de-risking the product, then you can start to commit to higher end product, higher end materials, welding capability, machining, so there's, as I say, the physical space that we occupy allows us to do quite a lot at scale, at large scale. We did a project for I can't remember who it was. It was a safety boat that came in to the workshop, and it was literally touching the roof and squeezing along the sides. But to be able to accommodate that sort of thing was really handy, and that's why we've insisted on a big workshop. So yeah, we're very flexible around that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, next question, please. Lady here.
Oh, no.
It's a nice question, I promise. So, from experience working with engineers, very technical and intelligent, but particularly with engineers and other disciplines in an organisation, can be a wee bit like herding cats.
Yeah.
How do you have a standard methodology or process for sticking to your budget and your schedule?
Yeah. I don't know how standard it is, but it's like a lot of projects, when you're scoping out what you're doing, it's really good at the earliest stage possible to meet the sort of decision makers, the stakeholders, the people that are going to influence that design. I remember we got a brief for a product, and I wanted to do a big kick-off meeting on it because I knew there were a lot of people involved. And I wanted the CEO of the company, big decision maker, had to be part of that early stage process, because if you think about the process that we go through where you're making decisions at the early stage that influence the output, if people are missing from that and they're brought in later, it can throw the whole thing out. They were reluctant to bring the CEO in purely because, actually, as it turned out, I think he quite liked the idea of being shown something. And if he didn't like it, he could, no, I don't like it. And there was a wee bit of a parade element of it. So as we'd understood that was probably the preferred route, then we have to budget for that. So we have to budget for all the iterations that are potentially going to come out of that. But in the main, I would almost insist that anybody who is going to influence this product should be at the early stages. It's not always possible, but even if you are in a situation where, I've been in a room of 30 people, all working on one product, and in that situation, there's kind of a anxiousness because you see people sitting there wanting to say something and might not. So it's just a case of having to go around each individual and making that time to get. And you soon find if there are people who are on the same page, or if there are people that are obtuse, or there's, it tends to work out. But I would try and insist as best I can to get everybody in.
Answer your question? Super. Thank you. Malcolm.
Yeah, I guess my question links maybe to the scale piece. I guess in the modern era, there's opportunity to build virtual sort of prototyping as well, especially for large scale models, and then get immersive technology where you can do that in 3D and you can walk around things and get into things, etc. Really appreciate your thoughts on how you see that comparing and matching what you can do in the physical world.
Mm-hmm. I think there's real scope to combine all the technologies. I mean, the way I see it is that we're hungry to replicate the final experience as quickly as possible. That's kind of what we're trying to do as a business. So it's about putting a model in someone's hand and saying it's going to be about this size, getting past that, and then moving on to the next stage. And I think the more technology that we can sort of amalgamate and pull together and use, the better. And the virtual reality, the augmented reality, all these kind of things. I was at a meeting with a company, and we built a small, it was a prestige tweeter for a speaker company. And I had this thing, I had it in CAD, and I printed out a little barcode, and I put it on top of a speaker. I took it to them, and I showed them it on an iPad, and I put the iPad over, and it picked up the barcode, and the tweeter just kept going like that, sort of flipping. And it's just frustrating to use a technology when it's not quite there. I'm sure it was my fault, actually, but when you see that, it sort of takes away the magic. So we're sort of reluctant to pull it in too early, or where it's maybe not appropriate. But I'm desperate to hear of new technologies. I'm desperate to use new technology to get that whole experience as realistic as possible, because you can save a bundle if you can get everybody on the same page before you have to commit to actually making it. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Thank you. Next question. John. Oh, have I missed? We'll come back to you next. You're getting your step count up, Lauren.
Hi, John Hunt from 10 Decker. It's a question, I guess, personal question for you both, to your company. I guess similar to you, I work very much in the beginning of things, the front end, and failure is a big part of our lives. And I'm always really interested in how you deal with failure in your own kind of like emotional state or mental state, but how as a company manager, because, we've done a lot of things, but yeah, it's imagine when you try and do, the more innovative, creative you be, the more effort you'll put into things that just don't come good in the end. And eventually you get there, hopefully. Yeah, no, it's a loaded question, because it's such a fundamental part of what we're doing as a business. And the nice thing about engineering and the awful thing about it is that it's so honest. So when you turn up at a meeting and you're developing a product and you put that product on the table, or you take people outside and you show them it in the car park, if it doesn't work, like everybody knows, like immediately it doesn't work. And so you've laid yourself out there, you've said, here's the product, come and see it, pick it up, play with it, and it doesn't work. That's, something to deal with. But
it's also about the context of making sure that your client understands the position you're in and where you are, and always kind of reminding them that if it's a brand new thing, it's like, this has never existed, nobody's ever done this before, so the expectation can't be that it's going to work tomorrow. And a lot of the incentive around the companies that we work with in terms of, companies that we sort of target as clients are companies that we know understand that process, have maybe done it before, so that helps break down the barriers when it comes to turning up with something that doesn't work. I've got a client at the moment, and the last 6 times I've met them, the prototype's failed. And it's because we're making leaps each time. And, I had a washer in my back pocket just yesterday. It was digging into my leg, and I thought, God, that was the thing that flew off and went away down the car park, which could have, caused the collapse. But the point is, you are exposed. It is a very honest industry. You do need to prepare people for that. And in terms of your own sort of sanity, you do need to reach a point, an agreement that we've done enough here. Okay, now we can start to throw a bit more money at it, or we can, So there's lots of ways of playing it. But you're right. It's hard. It's a hard thing to manage.
Thank you. And this gentleman at the back, and we'll come to you.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Alan Grindle. I'm self-employed consultant, engineering. What I was going to ask was, I realised that one of the hardest things is, I've been working in major companies for a long time, is pressing the button when design is ready to go ahead. And then the next day, somebody comes up with a wee bit better idea. And I liked the idea of just having one slide, but it was very symmetrical. One curve came down from the top right down to the bottom left, and one came from the bottom right up to the top left. And right in the middle was the cross point.
Yeah.
So how do you determine where the cross point is on a project that you don't really know from the start? And when do you start drawing that graph to get this cross point of when you stop engineering, stop designing, stop coming up with bright ideas, and actually press the button and go into manufacture?
Yeah. I suppose in defence it would be like an illustration of the process. This is the ideal world, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, if you were to really truly draw what the design process looks like, it's it would be a mess, and nobody would be able to see through it. Nobody would be able to gauge it or understand it. So we're trying to almost give people a sort of feel for what is happening. There are decision points all the way along those lines. And yes, the perfect crossover doesn't happen, because that crossover can actually move as more parts and pieces and ideas come in. But as I said earlier with the tag gun, this was, we are learning every day with the clients that we work with in all these different industries. Everybody's got a different approach. And the farming industry is fantastic, because these guys just kind of smash stuff together and make it work and limp it along. And the attitude there with that particular project was, right, stop. This is the point where we are good enough. And you need somebody to be in a position to say that. And the reason he could say that is because he knew how much he could invest in this before he had to start bringing cash in. And he had absolute faith in his tags. And the gun was a sort of thing that just helped you administer them. But knowing your figures, knowing your business, knowing when you've got to make that decision, you've got to stop. If you don't know when to do that, then you're going to get into trouble very quickly. And that is the thing. I mean, we love the design element of it. My business partner and I have a good sort of relationship, in the sense that I'm probably more creative, but he's really sensible, and he's really on it when it comes to the business. And he can review a company that are coming in to do some work with us, and he can say, have you looked at the business side of this? Are we understanding where we are, when we need to stop, when we need to launch, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of metrics that are filing into that. And yes, I like to oversimplify things, but it helps make a point. But I would say good business knows when it's done enough. That's the absolute crux of it.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
thank you.
this gentleman in front.
Hello. I was just wanting to know if you just deal with mechanical kind of tangible models, or are you able to, have you got the technology there for concepts like ion transfer through water or, electrics and things like that?
The short answer is no. I think what we really need to do, what we've established as a business, is that there are certain areas where we have the expertise and we have the knowledge, and we like to get hands-on, we like to get all that kind of stuff. But there are companies that are so laser focused on that sort of thing that it's easier to farm that kind of thing out. We had a project where quite quickly we realised that this needed an algorithm. And, we look around our office and, it's like, no, I'm not doing that. So you can farm that sort of thing out and you can get that specialist knowledge on the case, but we can brief them because we know the context of what we're doing. So I think having partners in those areas is really powerful. So we've kind of got that network and we're building that network.
And
but this technology
have that network in place. So you've got some.
You've got some.
Extent, yeah.
This technology is moving so fast that we just don't know. We need to make sure that who we're partnering with is still going to be there, and that the technology is going to be relevant when we actually need them. And these are all things that are just, that's why I quite like old-fashioned mechanical stuff, because, there are principles there that aren't going to change in a heartbeat. But.
Hey, how are we getting on? We've got about 5 minutes left. What more questions have we got? David?
I've got a question. Might be a little bit of a curveball for you, but
right.
So one of the key remits of OGTC, and in particular the startups that will be joining us, is obviously to help us unlock the full potential of the UK continental shelf. But there's an element of also building a new exciting supply chain here in the Northeast, bringing new innovation, new products, new manufacturing potentially. So I guess a couple of questions. How many of your products end up getting manufactured in Scotland or the UK? And how competitive do you feel the manufacturing landscape is in Scotland and UK compared to likes of China and other low-cost or high-value centres?
I guess ideal world is that we are close to suppliers. In fact, one of the things that we are good at is certainly the prototyping, fabricating of low numbers. Is best to keep close, because offshoring manufacturing to the Far East has been happening for decades, and it obviously has its benefits, cost being pretty much number one. But to be able to give a very definitive, this is it, model to a company like that, then keeps things right. There's no ambiguity. There's that. But in our industry, certainly in the early stage design, we have lots of local suppliers. We do a lot of the stuff ourselves because we've got capability for certainly low volume. When it gets to higher volume, one thing that we've run into a couple of times now is a lot of Scottish manufacturers are sort of set up and are ticking over and are quite content. They're not really as hungry or as ambitious as a lot of other manufacturers, say foreign manufacturers, because there's a sort of, and it's nice, it's nice to go into a company that's ticking over and well-oiled and working well, but, there isn't a huge amount of ambition in many cases. But when it comes to higher volume plastics and various other things, there are companies that are doing that, for instance. But and I suppose the costs are getting much more competitive because shipping, materials, labour, all of these costs are driving up all the time. So there's a balance. And I think we would encourage it as best we can. We are hitting a few barriers in terms of price point. There is an expectation of price point which some manufacturers can't achieve. So it's just about balance, and it's all project relevant as well.
Okay, thank you. More questions? I have one. If I can break the mould a bit. So where do you, sort of as an organisation, fit in that project process? Do you sort of partner for life? Do you come in and out? How does that work?
There's several ways. Traditionally, so it's a traditional consultancy. So what you end up doing is you work with companies who say throw you a project. So if you think about a company that's got 3 or 4 products that they would like to launch, and the resource within the company is stretched, and they're saying, we've got an innovation strategy, we want to get these 4 products out in the marketplace. they might packet those up and say, you look after that, take it to this point where we've done a proof of concept or feasibility, bring it back to the team, we'll decide whether we want to do it. So packets of work are just quite nice. We can get involved in retainers where we end up working with a company and, it's just like, work on this, but, wait a minute, now work on this. And we get a set number of hours a month, all that kind of stuff. More recently, we've sort of got a bit more entrepreneurial where we are starting to say, well, we can take a step back from this. We can charge less for this, but we want a piece of it. And even to the point where we're developing our own products. So we've got products within the company. So it was 95% consultancy, 5% ventures. Now it's probably around about 50-50.
Thank you.
Okay,
so that gives us time for one last question, if anybody has anything else they'd like to ask. Stephen. Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much. I'm going to ask quite a sort of mundane question, I guess. I mean, I've been staring at 4C and the logo for 20 minutes now, and I just wondered...
Should have brought more slides, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I just wondered if you could talk us through how did that come about? Because obviously being a design guy, you probably have a narrative for your...
yeah. It's actually... so, to foresee is... to foresee the future, all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of like back in was it 2002, the company was set up. So I actually joined in 2004, and when I met the two owners at that point, one of them has moved on, but so myself and my business partner, we are now the owners. It turns out the two guys that started it were dyslexic, and I don't think either of them could actually spell 4C, so they just said, there we go, why don't we try that? The other thing is they say that because it's 4C, it actually tends to be at the top of any attendance list when you go to an event. It's sort of numeric alpha type thing. So
that's thrown me, because I was trying to think of 4 words beginning with C that you were possibly basing the logo around. But
we used to have that, but we couldn't remember them ever. And the plus is what gosh, how long have I got? 4C is the company, 4C Design with consultancy, all that kind of stuff. As we move into ventures and lots of things that we're putting money into and effort into, these are the kind of plus things. So every new venture has got a company, but with a plus, if you can follow that logic. So it's kind of, there is actually a lot more meaning than I thought, but there you go. This is the kind of group logo, yeah. So this will end up being echoed across different projects. Yeah.
I bet you're glad he asked it. Okay, so on that note, that's us out of time today. So thank you very much, Will, for excellent talk. Really appreciate it.